The British capture of India is a complex historical event that spans over 200 years and is marked by a range of factors and events. It began with the establishment of the British East India Company in the early 17th century and ended with India's independence in 1947. The company's initial aim was to trade with India, but as time went on, it became more interested in establishing a monopoly over the Indian economy. This monopoly was achieved through a range of means, including military conquest, political alliances, economic policies, and cultural domination. One of the primary methods used by the British to capture India was through military conquest. The East India Company employed a powerful army, which they used to gain control over Indian states and territories. The company's first significant military victory came in 1757 when they defeated the Nawab of Bengal in the Battle of Plassey. This victory gave the company control over Bengal and allowed them to expand their territorial control throughout India. The British used a combination of military tactics and modern weaponry to defeat Indian armies, which were still heavily reliant on traditional methods of warfare. Another significant factor in the British capture of India was their use of political alliances. The British East India Company established relationships with Indian rulers and princes, who were given titles and positions of power in exchange for their loyalty to the British. These alliances allowed the British to maintain control over Indian states without direct military intervention. They also employed a policy of divide and rule, pitting Indian states against each other to weaken their power and influence. The British also implemented economic policies that were designed to benefit the British Empire at the expense of India. One such policy was the drain of wealth, which held that India's resources should be utilized to enrich Britain. This policy led to the exploitation of India's natural resources, such as cotton and jute, which were exported to Britain for processing and sale. The British also imposed heavy taxes on the Indian people, which were used to fund the British Empire's wars and expansion. These economic policies led to widespread poverty and unemployment in India. The British also employed a policy of cultural domination, attempting to erase Indian culture and traditions and replace them with British culture. The British introduced English as the official language, and Indian languages were marginalized. This policy had a lasting impact on Indian society, leading to a loss of cultural identity and widespread social upheaval. The British capture of India was not without resistance from the Indian people. There were numerous uprisings and rebellions throughout the colonial period, with the most significant being the Indian Rebellion of 1857, also known as the Sepoy Mutiny. This rebellion was a widespread uprising against British rule, led by Indian soldiers known as sepoys. The rebellion was brutally suppressed by the British, with thousands of Indian rebels and civilians executed. However, the rebellion had far-reaching consequences, leading to a significant shift in British policy towards India. Following the rebellion, the British government took direct control over India, with the country becoming a British colony. The British introduced a range of reforms, including the establishment of a modern legal system, the introduction of new technology and infrastructure, and the expansion of education. These reforms were designed to modernize India and bring it in line with British standards. The British also introduced a policy of indirect rule, where Indian princes and rulers were given significant power and control over their territories, while the British retained overall control. This policy was designed to maintain British control over India while appeasing Indian rulers and elites. The British also played a significant role in the Indian economy, introducing new agricultural techniques and technology, which led to an increase in agricultural production. They also introduced new industries, such as textiles and steel, which led to the growth of urban centers and the emergence of a new middle class. However, these economic developments were not without negative consequences for India. The introduction of new agricultural techniques led to the displacement of traditional farmers and the loss of traditional agricultural knowledge. The growth of industries also led to exploitation of Indian workers, who were paid low wages and worked in poor conditions. The British also had a significant impact on India's social and cultural development. The British introduced Western education and values, which led to the emergence of a new, westernized elite in India. This elite was heavily influenced by British culture and values and sought to emulate British society. However, The introduction of Western values also led to a decline in traditional Indian values and beliefs, which were seen as backward and primitive. The British also had a significant impact on Indian politics. They introduced a modern legal system and established democratic institutions, such as the Indian National Congress. However, these institutions were heavily influenced by British values and culture and did not necessarily reflect the desires and aspirations of the Indian people. The Indian National Congress, for example, was initially dominated by the Western-educated elite and did not represent the interests of the broader Indian population. Despite these negative consequences, the British did make significant contributions to Indian society and culture. They introduced modern infrastructure, such as railways, telegraph lines, and irrigation systems, which facilitated communication and trade across India. They also played a significant role in the preservation of India's rich cultural heritage, establishing museums and libraries that preserved Indian art and literature. However, it is important to recognize that the British capture of India was marked by violence, exploitation, and oppression. The British East India Company and the British Empire, in general, pursued policies that were designed to benefit Britain at the expense of India. The exploitation of India's resources and people led to widespread poverty and suffering, and the policy of cultural domination had a lasting impact on Indian society and culture. In conclusion, the British capture of India was a complex historical event that had far-reaching consequences for India and the world. The British used a range of methods, including military conquest, political alliances, economic policies, and cultural domination, to gain control over India. While the British did make significant contributions to Indian society and culture, their policies were marked by violence, exploitation, and oppression. The legacy of British colonialism in India is still felt today, with many of the country's social, economic, and political challenges rooted in its colonial past.